Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Alicia and I'm the owner of Alicia Be Creative. Today's tutorial is a couple of really quick and easy last minute Father's Day tumblers. So I wanted to show you guys a couple of other ways that you can put together some really cute Father's Day designs if you're looking for a last minute gift to grab for a dad in your life. So of course, everything I use in today's video will be listed and linked down in the description box down below. You'll even find discount codes for a lot of the products I like to use in my tutorial, so be sure to check that out as well. But let's go ahead and jump right into today's tutorial. Okay, so I wanted to start by showing you the products we're going to be using today. There will be a few other products we'll also use today, but this is kind of the basis for the designs we're putting together. So I have a couple of UV DTFs, I have a couple of cups we're going to use, and we're really going to be using sort of the wood grain and camo glitter look for these tumblers. So of course I'm going to start by prepping my tumblers. So I have one sublimation tumbler, which of course I'm not going to be using for sublimation, and then I have this Hog tumbler that has this really cute sleeve on it too that I bought at a discount from Hog. And so we're going to go ahead and get these prepped. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this sleeve off the center section. Now I will put this back together once these cups have gotten the final coat of epoxy with just like a little Velcro so that that can be removed. That way the entire cup can really be hand washed easily without getting any, debris or mold and things growing under that sleeve that comes with this cup. So we're going to sand the surface of both of these tumblers. What we're really just attempting to do is really just ensure that we've removed the manufacturer's shiny coating from both cups and really scuff up the surface in order to allow the paint and the alcohol inks and everything we're going to be applying to these cups to be able to adhere properly and not give us any issues in the epoxying process. So once I've sanded those with my 60 grit sand block, I'm going to go ahead and just wipe these down with 91% rubbing alcohol and a paper towel. Get these nice and cleaned up. Dish soap and water works as well. And then I'm going to take these to my spray tent and just spray them with a flat white spray paint in order to get them prepped. Before I do so, I decided last minute that I wanted to tape off the bottom section of the one cup that we're going to have the camo paint chip glitter on. And the reason why I did so is because, as many of you know, when you're working with chunkier styles glitter or just things that really can give you a hard time under epoxy because they're thicker than maybe other things you would be adding to a cup, I wanted to make sure I didn't have any issues with a wobbly bottom, which can be caused by having glitter or whatever you're applying to your cup, having those things sort of stick up on the bottom edge and really making it difficult or requiring a lot of sanding in order to end up with a smooth bottom. So I decided the easiest way to solve this would be to tape off the bottom. So leaving that bottom stainless steel, that's not going to prevent this from, say, dropping or cracking, but of course it is going to be a little bit of a more deterrent that if someone is to accidentally put their cup down on a table a little bit too hard, that we're not going to crack the epoxy that is on those bottom edges. I'm also going to tape off the rim off of the mug here because we are going to paint that black. So I don't really need to base paint that white. It's already sort of base coated, if you will. We're going to put chalk paint over that, so no need to spray that white. So we're back now with both cups. They've now just been spray painted a flat white. And so you might be asking why I chose to spray paint the sublimation cup because it was already white. Well, if you've ever used sublimation cups and attempted to do alcohol inks over top of that sublimation coating, you'll notice that those inks will very much repel off of that sublimation coating. Even when you sanded it, you're still not going to get a really true ink look without a lot of repelling using alcohol inks over that spray paint coated or that base coat of sublimation. So by adding a coat of flat spray paint in just the color white, that is going to ensure that my inks are going to have something to absorb into and not repel on the cup. So the next thing I'm going to do is, as you see, I've just gone ahead and taped off that center section there where that sleeve was on the larger 30-ounce cup because we're going to add some wood grain to that. So I'm going to grab a couple of arms here from my turners and we're going to get these in the cups. That way we have something to hold on to while we do the wood grain portion of both of these tumblers. So starting with the ink we're going to be using. We're using teakwood, and this is a Ranger alcohol ink. We're going to work on the 30 ounce first. I'm just taking this dry brush, which is literally my sole wood grain brush. I use this for every single wood grain. I never clean it. There's no point to, because it's my designated wood grain brush. You want a rough style brush in order to give yourself the really true wood grain look. So putting a couple strings and strips of that alcohol ink in that section and doing up and down motions with my dry bristle brush is really going to ensure that I get a really pretty wood grain look. Now, you don't have to use this color teakwood, and actually my preference is to use the color sepia from Ranger alcohol inks for my wood grains, but I've run out, and so most of the browns will really work to give you a true wood grain. It's just not my favorite brown to use when it comes to wood grains. I love the richer red look that sepia typically gives, but teakwood also really gives a really beautiful brown, dark look for a wood grain tumbler. So now that we're finished with the 30 ounce, we're going to move very quickly doing the same motions that we were doing with the other cup to accomplish a wood grain on this tumbler. So keeping in mind that, of course, I'm not going to be covering the handle of this cup with a wood grain. So I'm working around that handled section that is currently taped off to be able to do those up and down brush strokes to accomplish the wood grain look we're going for. You can continue to add inks until you're satisfied with how your wood grain looks. The more ink you apply, you do have to be mindful that, of course, the ink underneath is going to slightly be removed as you do so, but you also get a lot of dimension when you layer inks on top of each other. So I definitely encourage playing around with wood grains. They're really simple to do for sure, but definitely rewarding when you see the final results, especially if you're going to layer colors for a wood grain. It always comes out so beautiful. So now we've taken the tape off of our tumblers here, and I'm going to go ahead and just use a black chalk paint from Folk Art to paint over the handle here. So I decided to just go with a solid black handle here because the decal that we're going to be using is black, and so I wanted to tie in a little of the decal coloring into the overall look of the cup here. So we're just going to add the black paint to the handle to kind of just pull it all together. I also really love a colored handle that looks different from the rest of the cup. I don't know, there's just something about like having that stark contrast from the actual main source of the cup and having the handle be a different color that really is just so, it's really cool looking. It just kind of stands out a little bit more than if I were to wood grain this section. So I'm going to do 2 coats of paint and then leave that to dry. Again, chalk paint is going to dry really quickly, so within a few minutes, and this really will be good to go. And I can set this aside, both of these aside, I should say, and allow them to dry for a bit. So we're going to move on to adding the camo paint chip color to our 30 ounce tumbler here. I'm going to go ahead and use my Flynn Sisters Fast Set Epoxy in order to apply these camo colored paint chips. They call it, you know, man glitter, if you will, usually on many of the glitter sites. And this glitter that we're going to be using is actually from Glitter Makes It. It's called Fatigues. So I'm going to go ahead and mix equal parts of my Fast Cure Epoxy here. So 2.5 mLs of part A, 2.5 mLs of part B, and get this thoroughly mixed. So I'm only going to mix for, 2 to 3 minutes or so to really ensure that the epoxy is mixed thoroughly. And I am going to mix quite aggressively because at this stage of the game, I'm not worried about something like bubbles in this coat of epoxy because we're doing such a thin coat over the entire cup that is exposed with the white paint that I don't need to worry about bubbles being an issue, because as we smooth this epoxy onto the tumbler, we're really going to be smushing those bubbles out as well. So starting with the larger portion of the cup here, I'm just going to go ahead and apply a nice thin layer of this epoxy here, really being mindful to ensure that I am getting up against that wood grain here. Now, if you are worried about potentially getting your glitter or whatever you're adding to this cup over your wood grain because you don't trust yourself to be able to apply your epoxy without getting it into the sections you don't want to have that camo glitter on top of, then I would encourage you to let this thoroughly dry, put it on the turner for a coat of epoxy, of course, and then tape off that section very delicately to make sure you don't pull up your epoxy later. You could use just painter's tape over this section if you really are confident that, your paint was really nicely adhered and won't end up getting pulling up any of that wood grain. But if you are someone who's just worried that you're going to ruin the whole thing that you've started, it doesn't hurt to add a coat of epoxy before you add the camo glitter. So again, this camo glitter is called Fatigues from Glitter Makes It. I have a discount code for them down in the description box. So I'm just going to be really thorough here and just ensure that I am covering up as much of that white paint as possible. In hindsight, I do think that this camo glitter would have looked a little bit better over a black spray paint in these sections. I was able to really get a good coverage, but I did have to go back and do a second coat just to cover up some sections like towards the top rim and right under that sleeved area, that's the wood grain, to ensure that I was getting those camo pieces there and a lot of that white paint wasn't exposed. So I did go in with the second coat of this glitter in order to ensure that I got really good coverage and that a lot of that white paint is covered up. So we'll go ahead and remove the bottom tape section there. I've already smushed down that glitter to allow this to lie nice and flat. We're going to let this dry for a few hours overnight because they're wood grains and I'm not going to seal these. And then I'm going to go ahead and do my first coats of epoxy, okay? So I'm going to show you the epoxying process right now on the mug. I did the exact same thing with the 30 ounce. I just didn't show you guys because it was so far on the other side of my turner that it was hard to capture it in my camera view. So I'm just adding a coat of epoxy here. I added about 20 mLs to the mug and I added a full 30 mLs to the 30 ounce there. And so with the 30 ounce, the only thing I did different than I did here with the mug was that I focused on the wood grain section first, because of course I don't want to pull any of that man glitter, that camo color, fatigue color into the wood grain. So by ensuring I got a good coat of epoxy over that center wood grain section, I then was able to go back, of course, and cover the top and bottom section that has the fatigue color. So both have now had first coats of epoxy. With this 30 ounce, I ended up doing 3 coats of epoxy over this because I needed to ensure that this was as smooth as possible. Working with chunkier, more irregular cut glitters, of course, can really be a pain in the butt. I won't lie to you, because even when you smush that glitter down, even when you sort of seal it, sometimes you just have situations where some of those pieces just don't want to lay down, and so you'll have to do a bit of sanding. So I ended up doing 3 coats of epoxy, almost 30 mLs each, a little less for my second and third coats of epoxy, because I really wanted to try and get this cup as smooth as possible before I needed to go in and do sanding. Okay, so I'm just applying, this is now my third coat of epoxy here, and as you'll notice, I am taping off every single time that I apply my coat of epoxy, and as soon as I'm done epoxying and torching my cup, I then remove my tape immediately. If you don't feel confident that or you're worried that your epoxy will sort of pull over, you could set a timer for 10-15 minutes to then come back and pull that, but I always pull mine right away just because my coats of epoxy tend to be a little bit thin. So now we're on to the sanding process. Again, the mug now has had 2 coats of epoxy. The 30 ounce has now had 3 coats of epoxy here, and we're gonna do our sanding. There's definitely not much to do on this mug other than to sand that top rim with a 60 grit sanding block, and that's just to expose that fine line of stainless steel at the top. Now for this 30 ounce, I needed to get the big boy sander out because there was quite a bit of roughness to this cup that I really wanted to be able to knock down and get to be as smooth as possible. So I'm taking my hand sander out, and I got this from Walmart forever ago, but it's really great in a pinch if you ever end up with, you know, muffin tops or wobbly bottoms. It's really good for that too, because you really can sand a larger surface and not have to, you know, hurt your arms and hurt your hands trying to use, of course, a sanding block to accomplish this. So I'm taking this hand sander, of course, using my proper PPE. So I have my gloves on. I also have my respirator mask on so I don't breathe in any of these dust particles. I also would recommend eyewear of some sort to ensure that you also aren't getting this into your eyes, because again, you don't want to breathe this stuff in. You don't want to get that into your face, into your eyes whatsoever. So now that I've gone around this, I probably took about 2 to 3 minutes to really go around and get this as smooth as possible. Now, I don't need it to be like baby's bottom smooth, please don't get me wrong. I just need it to really knock down all of those really rough areas that were really going to continue to cause lumps and bumps no matter how many coats of epoxy I added. So again, I don't want this cup at the end of the day to weigh 25 pounds. So I wanted to knock down as much of that glitter that was still sticking up as possible. So now we're going to go on to the fun part, of course, which is applying our decals. So both of these UV DTF decals are from my website, leishabecreative.com. I've just launched a few new UV DTFs, and so these are the 2 Father's Day designs that I have listed currently. And so we are just going to apply these. So this Best Dad one was actually a little bit too tall, but I was able to cut that top portion off, and then I'll apply that later. I'll just bring it closer to the top Best Dad. And so we're just going to apply these decals. Super simple. I'm using my KELLBELL custom stand with the rulers to help me place this straight and really ensure that this is on. And then I'm just going to place that decal, and I smooth out from the center and then work my way outward on both sides. Once I'm done, I'm going to easily peel off that top transfer tape there. Really quick, smooth, and easy. Take your time. Make sure you really rub that decal down to ensure it's adhered to your cup. But that top transfer sheet should really come off really easily. We're going to do the same with that little bit of the decal that I needed to move down a little bit after I'd placed the main portion of the decal. And so I'm just going to smooth that on with my hands, make sure everything looks good, and then again, remove that top transfer sheet off. So that is it for this cup. Super cute, really fun, really easy to make, a great coffee mug for a dad that you know. And so now we're going to move on to the camo inspired mug. So this decal, well, this 16-ounce wrap says, if Papa can't fix it, then we're screwed. I thought it was super cute. And I love that all of the different silhouettes of the father with the child is of different camo, like different camo colors. So like there's an orange camo, there's the traditional army green camo, and then there's like a lighter green camo. It all just kind of matched so nicely, which is why I decided to go with this decal. And so I'm placing the main decal below the section where that sleeve will then go back onto when I get that put back together. But I am still going to decorate this section area, because in the event that the dad that receives this doesn't actually want to use that sleeve for any reason, that this section should also have some of those same silhouettes. So I am just kind of cutting apart this entire decal sheet and placing a bunch of those decals around that center wood grain section, and then I'll take the rest of the decals, so the other half of the decals on this wrap, and I'm going to go ahead and apply them to the back half of the cup behind where the main decal is placed. What I love about UV DTF wraps, and I feel like I say this all the time, my favorite wraps are the ones that I can cut apart and I can place the way I want. It allows me to have a little bit more freedom with my creating and not have to stick to applying the wrap as is. So those are always the wraps that I try and gravitate to and try and pull into my shop. So here's the final look at what it looks like with the decals on. Before I'm going to go in add our final coats of epoxy, which I will show you here, I'm going to seal my UV DTF in. So sometimes with UV DTF, you can get a little bit of repelling with your coats of epoxy. It's just because of the UV coating over top of these. Nothing wrong with the decals, but I'm sure many of you have noticed that if you try and go over it right with the right after you've applied it, that sometimes you can get repelling in that first coat, but of course it's fixed after subsequent coats. So to avoid that and ensure that I don't have any repelling, I'm going to add a coat of Mod Podge over top just to ensure that this is all sealed, everything looks good, and that I'm not going to have any issues with epoxy. So back to the turner for the final coats of epoxy here. So I'm going in with my Flynn Sisters Artist Cure here, and I have 30 mLs mixed up, and I'm going to go ahead and apply this to both cups. So I'm going to split this between both cups. The first cup only took about less than 15 mLs, honestly, again, because this is just a wood grain, so there's not a whole lot to need to cover up with wood grain and paint. Super flat, of course, and easy, and so it's already pretty smooth, so I really can stretch a good 12 mLs of epoxy across this. But again, I'll do another coat to make it the final coat of epoxy. So once I'm finished with that cup, of course, we'll move over to the 30 ounce. Same process here. Of course, I've taped off the bottom once again because we don't want to have epoxy on the bottom portion. We're going to leave that stainless steel. And I'm going to add the remaining amount of this epoxy, so just about 20 mLs onto this portion of the cup and really ensuring I get a nice smooth surface over this section. So of course, this is going to be the first of 2 coats of epoxy for the final, but we're gonna go ahead and torch this and then I'll remove the tape off the bottom. And then this was kind of it. So really quick, fun, easy, simple, but other ways that you can decorate cups for Father's Day. I do hope that you guys enjoyed today's video. As always, if you did, be sure to like this video and tell me in the comments what you thought, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!